Yeah.
Yeah, I did hear it one half. Just I didn't do this year, I broke. You think?
Make sure you got remote control. All right, click your clicker there. This one's ready for
Cool.
John. Thank you. Should work.
Okay, if you're wondering, your handout is page 11, but we are going to answer the one question that we have at the last part of chapter 9. I only put one question down there, which is very simple. If you remember everything we read in verses 15 through 23 of chapter 9, we'll answer that one real simple. The only people I know of course, Linda Hutchison, we want to continue to remember her, because we don't know when, if she'll be able to get out of the facility where she is right now. Also, Glenda Bowen is going to have surgery this Thursday, and it'll be outpatient surgery, but it's a very painful surgery because it's her sinuses. Glenda Bowen. And we have several people traveling due to the holidays, so we'll probably also have some visitors today as well. So we want to continue to remember them. The Buxtons, they're gone. That's why he's not here this morning. And let's see, the Basses are gone. The Douthits are gone.
Orphans are gone.
Yeah. So just you and Nona are here.
They're in Branson.
Without your children. Yeah. Let's go to our Heavenly Father in prayer. Our most loving Heavenly Father, we are so thankful for the privilege we have of being able to assemble together and be able to encourage one another and to be able to study Thy Word without fear of persecution. We're so thankful for all the blessings You've blessed us with, the spiritual blessings, the physical blessings, and the material blessings. And we're thankful for the talents that You've blessed us with. And we ask that You would be with us, that we would utilize our talents, and that You would give us additional talents that we can do even greater works in Thy vineyard. We ask, Father, that You'd be with our members who are pending surgery, our Sister Glenda Bowen. Also, we ask that You'd remember our Sister Linda Hutchison, that she might be able to return home in the very near future. We ask also, Father, that You'd be with our members that are traveling, that they might have safe journeys and be able to return and continue to labor with us here in this congregation. And as we continue our study in the book of Numbers, we ask that You would help us to have a full appreciation of those things that You want us to apply to our lives, so that we might be able to overcome the temptations placed before us by Satan, and that we might be better able to teach and encourage others, that they might know the joys of being a Christian before it's everlasting too late. These things we ask in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen. All right. The one question in your handout is on page 10, and that was, compare this section with the last 5 verses of Exodus. Moses uses the phrase, command of the Lord, and how is God communicating His commandments in this passage? Remember, we talked about it in chapter 9. We can, let's just go to the last 5 verses of Exodus and you can read them. Exodus chapter 40, verses 34 through 38. Isaac, read that, will you please?
And the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tabernacle of meeting because the cloud rested above it, and the glory of God filled the tabernacle. Whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, the children of Israel would go onward in all their journeys. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not journey till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud
Hello,
of the
Kevin.
Lord was above the tabernacle by day, and the fire was over it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys.
Do you have one of these?
Sorry.
That's all right. Page 11. Now, what Isaac just read, there's another verse that I'll now ask you to turn to. It's Exodus 24th chapter and verse 16, which says, Now the glory of the Lord rested on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the 7th day he called to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. So, recall now what we talked about in Numbers, the 9th chapter, latter part, because we're getting ready to move for the first time. They've been here at Mount Sinai in that wilderness for 1 year and 1 month. And now God is going to move them. So how's he going to do this?
By the cloud at night, by day, and fire by night, right?
Okay? And so if the cloud is not over the tabernacle, that tells them that they need to
Move.
disassemble it and get ready to move. And they move to wherever the cloud is. Right? Okay. All right, let's go to chapter 10 then. And as I mentioned, it's time now for them to leave Mount Sinai. The Lord has, through this process of 13 months, has prepared his people for departure to march their way to the promised land. Now, it's still going to be a long period of time before they get to the promised land, but he's going to guide them. So let's look at the first 11 verses of Numbers, and we'll break it down. Chuck, if you'd read chapter 10, verses 1 through 6, and then Kevin, if you'd read 7 through 11.
And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Make 2 silver trumpets for yourself. You shall make them for hammered work. You shall use them for recalling the general congregation and for directing the movement of the camps. When they blow both of them, all the congregation shall gather before you at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. But if they blow only one, then the leaders, the heads of the divisions of Israel, shall gather to you. When you sound the advance, the camps that lie on the east side shall then begin their journey. And when you sound the advance the second time, then the camps that lie on the south side shall begin their journey, and they shall sound the call for them to begin their journeys.
Kevin, verses 6 through 11, please.
When you blow an alarm the second time, the camps are pitched on the south side shall set out. An alarm is to be blown for them to set out. When convening the assembly, however, you shall blow without sounding an alarm. The priestly sons of Aaron, moreover, shall blow the trumpets, and shall be for you a perpetual statute throughout your generations. When you go to war in your land against the adversary who attacks you, then you shall sound an alarm with the trumpets, that you may be remembered before the Lord your God, and be saved from your enemies. Also in that day of your gladness and your appointed feasts, and on the first days of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over the burnt offerings, and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, and they shall be as a reminder of you before your God. I am the Lord your God.
In verse 11.
Now in the second year, in the second month, on the 20th of the month, the cloud was lifted over the tabernacle of the testimony.
Okay, so The Israelites have been camped here at Mount Sinai in the wilderness there for a year. Here they are getting ready to move. And as you can see in these verses, it's very specific. They've received the order of God to decamp and proceed towards the promised land. They therefore, and I should say the Samaritan introduces at this place the words which we find. Turn to Deuteronomy, the first chapter, and Mike, if you'd read verses 6 through 8, please.
The Lord our God spoke to us in Horeb, saying, "We have dealt long enough at this mountain. Turn and take your journey, and go to the mountains of the Amorites, to all the neighboring places in the plain, in the mountains and the lowland, in the south and on the seacoast, the land of the Canaanites, and to Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates."
So suddenly the cloud's lifting from the tabernacle, because it's time for the people to pack up their tents in the tabernacle of the Lord and follow the cloud on the journey. So look specifically at chapter 10 and verse 13 for just a moment. Verse 13 says, "So they started out for the first time according to the command of the Lord by the hand of Moses." So notice the beautiful picture that we see. Go to verse 33. And Kathy, if you would read Numbers 10, verse 33 for me, please.
And they departed from the mount of the Lord 3 days' journey, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them in the 3 days' journey to search out a resting place for them. So notice that beautiful picture, if you will. The people set out on a 3-day journey with the Lord going before them to seek out a resting place, as it says, for them. In other words, God is leading the people to bring them to a place of rest. If we only understood this truth about God, who goes ahead of us to bring us rest, it would be a wonderful idea. We see this picture further, though, in verses 35 and 36. Florence, if you would read that, please.
So it was, whenever the ark set out, that Moses said, "Rise up, O Lord, let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee before you." And when it rested, he said, "Return, O Lord, to the many thousands of Israel."
So God goes before the people to scatter the enemies. He is totally protecting his chosen children, and then returns to rest with Israel. This is the picture that we need to have firmly in our minds as we look at the next scene, which is recorded in chapter 11. But I want to mention, because obviously we're not going to read all of chapter 10, but I want you to notice the specifics that God gave Moses as far as how they would move out. You notice how orderly that was? He specifically named which tribes would go, and of course the Levites. Remember the two sons that had one son had 2 carts, one son had 4 carts, and he specifically mentioned that they would follow the first 3 tribes, because once they got there, their duty was to immediately set the tabernacle up again. And then when they got the tabernacle set up, the 3rd son would come in with all the items to be put into the tabernacle. And so it was very orderly, and you can imagine if the Israelites did not follow these instructions, the kind of chaos that would take place. So God was very orderly, and he expects us to be orderly today as well. In our worship service to him, everything is to be decent and in order. And if we fail to do that, then just as the Israelites would have failed, so would we. Any thoughts or comments on chapter 10? Yes, Chuck.
I stand amazed at the simplicity of what we're reading in conjunction with what really took place.
Yeah.
With the thousands and millions of people.
In fact, he even gave the instructions in verse 1, "Make 2 silver trumpets for yourself. You shall make them of hammered work. You shall use them for calling the congregation and for directing the movement of the camps." If you think about that term there, now remember, in this first numbering, in the book of Numbers. They were to number all men, how old? 20 years of age and older, because they were to be the men who were capable of fighting. Because eventually they're going to have to conquer the people that's living in the promised land. And if you think of our current military structure, the trumpet is a very important part in our service today. Whether you realize it or not, the trumpet is played first thing in the morning. The trumpet is played at the end of the day as they lower the flag. And if you're on a base and you hear that trumpet, what do you think you're supposed to do? Stop and get out. And if you can see the flag, you salute the flag. If you can't see the flag, you put your hand over it. You turn towards the music, because that trumpet is going to be right there beside the flag. If you look at the old Western days, the cavalry and everything, what was the purpose of the trumpet? Even in the war between the states, I don't like to call it the Civil War because there wasn't anything civil about it. But if you think about the war between the states, you had retreat, you had charge. And the trumpet was very important in that. And the trumpet is very important here when it's going to direct the Israelites. They had to move forward. They had to assemble. All of these things, God was very specific in his instructions to the people. Any comments on chapter 10? All right, let's look at chapter 11 then. And I want to read the first 3 verses of chapter 11. Donna?
Now the people became like those who complained of adversity in the hearing of the Lord. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them, and soon some of the outskirts of the camp. The people therefore cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died out. The name of that place is called Meribah, because the fire of the Lord burned among them.
Okay. Let's go back and, before we talk about those 3 verses, let's go back and answer the questions that I put down for chapter 10, all right? And that's going to be in your handout, page 11. I had 4 questions, six questions there, I guess. Yeah, 6 questions. First question, for what occasions are the trumpets to be blown? Okay. All right. And question number 2, and that's also found in verses 2 through 4 of chapter 10, okay? Question number 2, when they are blown during wartime, what 2 things will this cause God to do on their behalf? Okay. All right, verse 9, they will be remembered before the Lord, and you will be saved from your enemies because he will scatter them. Question 3, for what reason are they blown during the burnt and peace offerings?
Memorial for you before you're done.
Okay. Look specifically at verse 10, if you will, where it says, also on the day of your gladness, in your appointed feast, and at the beginning of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifice of your peace offerings, and they shall be a memorial for you before your God. I am the Lord your God. Okay? All right, question number 4. Based on the responsibilities given to the 3 sons of Levi, why might Gershon and Merari go out before Kohath?
So they set up tabernacle?
So they can set it up. That's verse 17. Where were the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle located during their travels? Okay?
On the cloud.
Okay. Sons of Gershon, Merari, set forward and immediately followed the 3 tribes which encamped on the east of it under the standard of Judah, bearing the tabernacle, such parts of it as were committed to each of their charge. And then the 3 tribes located on the east side of the tabernacle were Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Okay? Number 6, what emotions would you guess were going through their minds when the cloud began to move for the first time in over a year?
Finally getting to move on to the
I have any more questions than 5.
It's on this page.
You didn't have 6 on the next page?
No,
5 and 6.
I don't.
On page 12.
It's on twelve.
Page 12.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're special.
Your book is
Yes, you
special,
are.
I
I want
guess.
that book.
Your book is special because
Your book is totally different.
my page 12, here,
Another page 12.
There's 13, there's 12.
here.
That was a trick, wasn't
You got it, you got it.
Oh,
You got it.
I thought she was looking at.
You just didn't want to answer the question, I know. Just because it was an opinion question, you just didn't want to answer it. Well,
A little bit of time to get back on track.
I mean, you can only imagine what might be going on in the Israelites' minds here. Some of them may be a little bit confused. Some of them may be nervous. But you can also speculate that they were probably excited about the fact that they've been stuck here in this place for a year now. And now suddenly they're moving. And they've been promised that they would go to the promised land, so you can look to the future and you can think that, hey, things are going to be brighter for us. And so, obviously, there are several things that they could be going through their mind.
I thought they were thrilled to be moving on toward the promised land finally.
Yeah, finally, yeah,
After a year.
yeah. And I'm sure that's probably true. All right, yes, Donna.
I put excitement, trepidation, and fear, etc.
You just put it all in there, didn't you? Okay,
The unknown.
Well,
So-
all of their leaders, they shouldn't be afraid.
well, that's true. Although they had doubted Moses before, and Moses, in his stubbornness, I guess you could say, when he was told to speak to the rock, and what did he do? He hit the rock, and so he took credit for providing water for them instead of giving God the credit. And so as a result, God continued to allow or to insist that Moses would lead the people to the promised land, but his punishment was that he was only allowed to look over into the promised land and could not go into it. And yes, Pat.
You know what's scaring me about that little episode there is that God expects us to obey him to the letter, and it's pretty scary. I mean, the fact that he was punished there, you know he was under a lot of pressure, but God just didn't allow that anger.
Well, that's true.
It means we better respect him.
As much as they've seen by now in this picture, they ought to be learning to obey. They're starting to catch up. They've seen death and everything else.
Well, they're slowly but surely catching on. But it's still a long road to hoe here, or a long road to hoe, I should say. That's an old farmer's term. And so that's what I say in verses 1 through 3 that we just read here in chapter 11. Life is hard because the people complained and the Lord heard their complaining. Some translations say they complained about their hardships or their adversity. 3 days after leaving Mount Sinai, and the people are complaining. What are they complaining about? They're complaining that life is hard. It's not as easy as it was while they were in Egypt. They had a land of plenty in Egypt. They had plenty of grass for their livestock and everything. Everything was good there. But God saw something better for them.
Well, if you remember people, there's always some complaints.
Yeah. Do what, Florence?
I would think about the people today. Some people out there today would complain a lot more, not as much as those people did, and
Well, that's true.
never even accept.
But you gotta, I mean, they're human, and so they're in the wilderness, and life in the wilderness is not easy. Nothing had happened, but what had changed? Nothing was difficulty, nothing in particular, but life is hard because they're in the wilderness. And they don't have it easy like they had it in Egypt. The people are in the wilderness, and it is not an easy journey. Unaccustomed to the fatigues of travel and wandering into the depths of a desert, less mountainous, but far more gloomy and desolate than that of Sinai, without any near prospect of the rich country that they had been promised, the promised land, they fell into a state of vehement discontent. And
Better than making bricks as a slave, though.
do what?
It'd be better than making bricks as a slave.
Well, that's true. That's true. But notice verse 1 specifically. It says, "Now when the people complained, it displeased the Lord, for the Lord heard it, and his anger was aroused. So the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some of them, or some in the outskirts of the camp." So the displeasure of God was manifest against the ungrateful, if you will, the complainers, and by fire. Sin in an extraordinary manner. And it is worthy of notice, however, that the discontent seems to have been confined to the extremities of the camp. Now, what would that suggest to you?
Stragglers,
Do what?
stragglers, those kind of want to turn around and go back, or
Okay, yeah, certainly it could be that.
Do you think it was the people that joined in from Egypt, not necessarily all?
Certainly that was some of the people, particularly when they were complaining about manna and everything, and we'll get into that a little bit later here. It was those people that made the loudest complaints, and obviously when they made the complaints, then the Israelites joined in on it. But I would also suggest this thought as well. When you think about that verse, when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some. The extremities of the camp would be those that are furthest away from the tabernacle. So, I mean, this is just a speculation, but the further you are away from God, the greater the complaint might be. I've seen, and you have seen people as well, who may not be faithful people until some tragedy happens, and suddenly God becomes foremost for them. But all those other times, they complained. They lived a life without God. And so those in the extreme part of the camp may be this way. Consider, if you will, the contrast. In Exodus, when the people lacked food and water, the people complained, and God responded to teach the people to trust in the Lord, to provide for them. Notice that there is nothing that is lacking for the people. Have you ever thought about the fact that when they left Egypt, they only took the clothes that was on their backs? Those clothes never wore out. God took care of them, but they didn't seem to recognize that. The people are complaining simply because they do not like life. And life is not easy. In this world today, we know that. Life is difficult. Life has its hardships and adversities. And life is full of difficulties, isn't it? And so nothing is different than what they're experiencing. The anger of the Lord, though, is kindled when we complain about the life God is giving us to live. So notice what happens next. First off, Moses prays to the Lord, and the fire goes out. Moses intercedes on behalf of the people. Wrath should fall on the people, and the people deserve for the fire of the Lord to burn against them. But the intercessor intervenes on behalf of the people, and the fire is extinguished. Who intervenes for us? Jesus Christ. And as long as we remember our Lord and Savior, his suffering, and we keep that close to our hearts, then things will go well. Any thoughts through verse 3? All right, let's look at the next section then, verses 4 through 10. Let's see. Karen, you want to read? I'll shorten it for you a little bit. Read 4, 5, and 7. And then, Pat, if you'll read 8, 9, and 10 for me.
Now the rabble that was among them had a strong craving. And the people of Israel also wept again and said, "Oh, that we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt, that cost nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at. Now, did you say through 7?
Yes, through 7.
Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its appearance like that of the dead one.
Oh, the people went about and gathered it, ground it in millstones of beaten, or beat it in the mortar. Phew. Cooked it in pans and made cakes of it, and the taste was like the taste of pastry prepared with oil. And the dew fell on the camp in night, and the manna fell on it.
In verse 10.
And then Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, everyone at the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord was greatly aroused. Moses also was displeased.
Okay. So you would have thought by now that the Israelites would have learned a lesson. And that is that we do not want to complain, because complaining brings the wrath of the Lord and judgment against them. Obviously they had not learned this lesson, because if you look again at verse 4, it says, "Now the mixed multitude who were among them yielded to intense craving, so the children of Israel also wept again and said, Who will give us meat to eat?" Well, the rabble, having a craving for meat rather than manna, was the ones complaining. Now, in the Exodus account, we saw that it was not only the people of Israel who came out of Egypt, and I think, Exodus 12, verse 38, Jack.
A mixed multitude went up with them also, in flocks and herds, a great deal of livestock. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough, which they had brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were driven out of Egypt, and could not wait, nor had they prepared provisions for themselves.
Okay, so it is this group called the rabble that cry out for meat, but it's not just the rabble. Now, we don't know exactly who this mixed group was. They could have been servants of some of the Israelites. They could have been husband or not husband, but wives generally of the Israelites. Could have been husbands. Or it could have been people who had also seen and heard enough about God that they were looking for a better place as well. Nonetheless, they were not in a bondage type situation in Egypt like the Israelites were. And so they were used to all the freedom. They were used to the meats and the fine things that they could get in Egypt. And so here they are out here in the wilderness eating nothing but manna. That, if we were to compare it today, might taste like a pastry that we might make for a pie. Now, to me, that pastry made for a pie is the most delicious thing you can ever have when you have the fruit in that pie. It's called a cobbler. And I like the dough better than the rest of it. That's just me. Anyway, so it's this group. People who had comparatively little knowledge of God, feeling the difficulties and the fatigues of the journey, were the first to complain. And then we see that the children of Israel joined them in their complaining and made a common cause with this mixed crowd, or you might even say that they are like infidels. But notice what they are saying. In verses 4 through 6, "Oh, that we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt that cost nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at." This is not the first time that the people complained. Go back and look at Exodus, the 16th chapter, and verse 3, Isaac.
"And the children of Israel said to them, Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots and meat, and we ate bread to the full, you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger.
All right, and Chuck, go to Numbers, the 21st chapter, verse 5.
And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food, no water, and our soul loathes this worthless bread.
So basically what they're saying is, we remember eating the variety of food that cost them nothing in Egypt. However, that food cost them their very lives, as they were, as Jack mentioned earlier, they were slaves in Egypt. They did not have that freedom. But all they could think about was the variety of food that they ate there. Sometimes we let our stomachs guide us in decisions that we should not make. But notice verse 6 specifically in chapter 11, where it says, "But now our whole being is dried up. There is nothing at all except this manna before our eyes." So all that we have to look at, they're saying, is this manna. And their strength is dried up. The Hebrew word for strength in the Revised Standard Version, in some translations read appetite or soul, speaks to the spirit of these people. We have absolutely no strength or desire to continue because we have to eat this same food, this manna. That's the attitude that they had. And you look at verses 7 through 8 again. These two verses go on to point out how good this manna was. Notice again what it says. The people went about, gathered it, and ground it on millstones, or beat it on the mortar, cooked it in the pans, and made cakes of it. And its taste was like a taste of pastry prepared with oil. And when the dew fell on the camp in the night, the manna fell on it. It wasn't a product that tasted bad, like liver. Now, I recognize there may be some people in here that like liver. So, the idea is that this manna was made into cakes and pastries. But the people, and we get that way ourselves, you know, after we've eaten the same food day in and day out, we get tired of it. And we might want to change. And I can understand why these people might complain. But they were looking at the here and now instead of the future. And that's the problem with people today, is we don't look at the future. And so the problem is in what the people are essentially communicating here. They are saying that life was better before we knew God. That's a sad picture, isn't it? Life was better when we were not on the way to the promised land. Sad picture. Life was better when we were enslaved. I can't imagine anybody feeling that they were better when they were enslaved. But they are complaining about what they do not have at this point. They are complaining about what God has not given them. In the first 3 verses, they were complaining about what God was giving them in life, which was hardships. Now they are complaining about what God has not given them, which was a better menu of food. And they remember the provisions of Egypt and complain against the provisions from God. Notice again verse 10, where it says, "Then Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, every one at the door of his tent. And the anger of the Lord was greatly aroused. Moses also was displeased." And so what we see here is it reveals that Moses was displeased at this, and the Lord was angry. Everyone at the door of his tent would suggest that the people were not ashamed of their sin. Now, in all fairness, though, we have to keep in mind that these Israelites have only been a little over a year now at this point, learning to respect and obey God. And so you could see, and I'll go back to when I was first, when I first became a Christian. And I think back many things as a young man, even as a teenager before I became a Christian. Some of the things I did was not something I would want to do. The Apostle Paul was the same way, wasn't he? He thought he was doing right, but when he learned he was doing wrong, he always remembered those things that he did wrong, didn't he? But yet, at the end of life, he was able to say, I've kept up the faith, I've fought a good fight, and now there awaits a crown of righteousness for me. And so God knows that we are human beings and we are going to sin. Adam and Eve sinned. Wow.
Wow, that's better.
He said he was going to put it in there. He did.
That's better.
I have to tell him to turn it down.
No excuse now.
All right. Any comments through verse 10?
Yeah, you said you remember all the things you did when you tell us about it. No.
We'll just take your word
He
for it.
moved forward.
Do you think the Apostle Paul talked about them? He remembered them, but I don't think he talked about
I
them.
remember all the things I did when I was a kid. I don't want to tell it all.
Right. Nothing you want to brag about, huh? Yes, Chuck.
There's a pattern here that we need to remember in the church, and that is that these people who come out of Egypt were very novice in their thinking.
That's very.
When we have a baptism, we've got to the point where we sit them down in a pew, give them a Bible, and let them starve to death. We have to learn to take care of the weakest child we have in this congregation.
Well, and you're exactly right. I've always, even when I was in management with Pfizer, one of the things I was always taught is that if you're teaching a class, you teach a class where the individual with the least amount of knowledge can understand what you're teaching. It bothers me when preachers get up there and they talk about all this Greek and they try to quote Greek and stuff like that. I don't know of anybody in the congregation that can read Greek or understand Greek. So I don't do that. And I try to keep things as simple as possible. There's that old KISS principle. I don't like the way most people use it. They use it as keep it simple, stupid. I don't like that phrase. I like to say keep it simple and sweet, because that's exactly what you should do. And I've said before, there's no dumb questions. But a teacher who would get up and maybe in a mild way rebuke a person for asking a question and not looking at trying to answer that question is a teacher that's going to cause people to be lost. When we have new converts here, one of the first things I do, because I've always felt this way, is that I sit down with them and teach them a new converts class.
I remember.
You remember that, don't you?
Yeah, me and David.
Yeah. Well, you and Chris.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
David.
Yeah, that's right, David, yeah.
Yeah.
Because as you mentioned, Chuck, when a person is baptized, they have a lot of excitement, but they don't know that much. And if you really want to help them on their journey towards the promised land, you want to do everything you can to teach them while they're excited and while they're wanting to learn. And so I do personally take, if it's just one person, fine. If it's 2 or 3 people, fine. And I have a book that I sit there with them and we go through a new converts class because I think it's important. And that helps to keep them in the church and not lose them.
I'm still here.
You're still here. And Isaac's making progress. I've even had Isaac lead a prayer once or twice in here. So he's making progress. So, and I appreciate the work that Isaac is doing and everything.
You
Yes,
have to
Pat.
realize that new converts come out of the wilderness just like these people did, and you do need to teach them the
Exactly
basics
right.
of why they became the Christian.
Yeah. And why they need to follow the scriptures and everything.
continue to learn
Yeah.
through the Bible and people teaching it.
I suppose most of those people were just basically followers and they need to be led.
Yeah, Exactly right. I remember when I was stationed in Fort Carson, Colorado, and the congregation where we went was in Security, Colorado, and I had been put in charge to get together the song leaders and stuff like that. And we had a young man that we had converted that was an old country and western singer. Now you can imagine how he led songs. He had that country and western style about him. And there was this retired Air Force major that I did a lot of personal work classes with. He wasn't there that Sunday. This young man led singing. I thought he did a good job, except it was a little slow. Okay, we understand. But I thought he did a good job. But that retired Air Force major came back, and I guess maybe one member of the congregation had made a comment to him. And he came up and he chewed me out for asking him to lead singing, and said that he will never lead singing here again. Well, the young man found out about it. They left the church. And that's exactly what happens when you treat people that way. So.
I don't think God's happy about that either.
No, no.
We're talking about the complainers, in every crowd, there's going to be a complainer.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Well, we will continue our study of chapter 11 next week. We'll start with verse 11, and we'll finish chapter 11 next week. But I appreciate your comments this morning.